With that, Lord Stefan Heller, John Bruner, Michael Blum, and Alex Bobotek with a more charming, yes, and Fergus.
Fergus.
So that's how we're going to do. We're just going to sit here and let Fergus do the talking.
Do you want to say hi?
So, my question for you, and
I have a joke.
yes, you do.
Yeah.
Please.
What do you call a deer with no eyes?
What?
No idea. What do you call a deer with no eyes and no legs? Still no idea. Okay, that's it.
Dad jokes central right here.
Can you scoot over?
Exactly. So, better onboarding. Actually, this panel came out because Stefan and I like to chat every now and then, and we ended up talking about, we have lots of controls within the network. Once a text message comes in, there are ways to get on top of something that shouldn't be sent, and we're going to talk about that in another panel about the sophisticated tools available. The bigger challenge is, can I understand what's coming on the network before it gets on board, right? A shoplifter has an intent that has a digital signature. Can we use that digital signature to come to figure out who's coming with bad intention? With that, I would like to start my first question with you, Alex. Now, in your dual role, you're the head of the architecture, malware architecture group at AT&T. You're also vice chair at MOG. So talk to us a little bit about MOG and what MOG does, and then we can go down there a little bit. You have a little bit of a history also with 10DLC, the very original pilots. So if you're interested to know the backstory of how 10DLC came out to be, Alex Bobotek sponsored some of the very, very early pilots, the technical pilots, I'm not talking the product one, about tagging, where we basically said, can we do some of the tagging? And this is 2014, 2015?
I think it was 2017 when we announced that we were actually going to do it. We had a concept, a plan, and we did it.
And
not only did we do it, but North America, well, the US did it.
Yeah. And to click down a little bit, what we were trying to do was to work on tagging ATP messages that were legitimate sender traffic. And so that was basically saying, once a message got through the front door, is there a way we can put tracer shots to it to go through and figure out where it's going? Any lessons learned? Would you like to reflect on the progress we've made since that 2017 year?
Sure. Why did we do it? We wanted to have a better idea of what the traffic coming to the carrier where we filter it was, and how reputable it was. We wanted to provide the senders and the service providers, the CSPs, an opportunity to give us their input on what they thought the quality of a specific messaging campaign is. And that has been very beneficial. It's helped us improve the spam filtering. We have less spam as a result, as well as increase the deliverability of the good messages. So this grew out of that concept and the notion that we need to empower the CSPs, not only by providing them information. David mentioned threat intelligence, feedback loops in the previous panel. So we provide feedback loops, but we also gain information indirectly from the senders on the way in. And that helps feed 2 layers of control.
And before we go into that a little bit more of that conversation, I do want to talk about MOG and what MOG does, because to me, MOG kind of provides an overall umbrella for figuring out how threat intelligence works. And I know this is the first time all of you are on a panel talking about this topic, so I'll try and move the conversation along as much as I can. But you want to start with that, Alex?
MOG, the Messaging, Mobile, and Malware Anti-Abuse Working Group, began as an email protection anti-spam organization at a time where ISPs were facing what they believed was an existential threat. And it's evolved into a forum for education, collaboration, and as well as producing a lot of best practices docs. It's not a standards organization. It's global. It has hundreds of member organizations, and is a place where I've learned probably more than anything else. It's a place I go to learn, to teach, and it's the collaboration. You know, I never know what I'm going to get out of MOG. I know I'm going to hear a lot of great sessions. I know I'm going to learn from the sessions, but where I really learn is outside the sessions, just working with my peers, Michael and I, and many others in this room, TJ, actually everybody in this room, I've had interactions with at MOG, and the result is a better ecosystem where we come up with new techniques, feedback loops, collaboration methods every time. It's been indispensable in advancing the ecosystem.
Actually, the four of us were on a MOG panel in Dublin a month ago.
Yeah.
So can we just are we replaying that a little bit?
No, it's a new panel.
Yes.
So, but speaking of, the reason why I bring up MOG is because one of my learnings from MOG, my first meeting was in 2014, and was the idea that the bad guys are super smart, and they're constantly testing the network. To go back to the original Jurassic movie, like the dinosaur testing the electrical fence,
Exactly, yep.
and they're starting probably in email world, and they're getting squeezed out of it, and then it's coming down the pike. They're going to start testing as high friction and expensive SMS is, and it's been said before in today, pricing is not a deterrent for the spammer because they make so much money out of the one bad use case that they don't mind spending the money. So,
Well, it's not that they're making money off of the attacks that are successful. Even just starting out, they're not paying for it. They're all stolen credit cards. So their cost to entry is still zero.
and are you still seeing, and especially in your role, Michael, are you seeing a lot of financial spoofing for consumers or brand spoofing?
I try to veer away from spoofing, more impersonation.
Okay.
Because in the US, from a spoofing perspective, in SMS, not very prevalent at all. In the rest of the world, there is some instances where entry into the network is a little bit easier to spoof, et cetera. My big thing around financial, even other industries, is impersonation. So it comes from putting that Wells Fargo in your in the body of the text that leads people to believe that it's Wells Fargo, rather than spoofing. Right? It's an impersonation.
So it's more in-network detection.
It's in-network. It's part. It's what we do is all in-network. We do use external influences to aid in that, but we're in-network trying to, in real time, trying to stop the impersonation, et cetera.
And without giving away the secret sauce, of course, is there a way you can shed light on the external sources that you use to?
Yeah, so we do use external sources like TCR data. We use inputs from Aegis. We use inputs from NetNumber, Newstar. I mean, all the big players that are out here that provide additional metadata information. And we also use sourced from the operators, abuse feedback from the abuse reports from the consumers themselves. So there are a lot of different avenues where we collect different bits of data, and kind of back to the abuse score, if you will, to determine whether something is more legitimate or more malicious.
And so then my question would be to flip that a little bit and then turn it over to Stefan and John, is if the brand comes and says, I'm the good guy, how do I clean up my act and make sure that if I'm sending, let's say, a gift card, and it has the word Wells Fargo in it, doesn't get filtered out? What would be a good way to, like, from an onboarding perspective, what could they do to make that process a bit smoother?
That sounds campaign to me.
It does sound like campaign, doesn't it?
Guarantee it as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, sure. So if a brand registration coming into the registry goes through a validation and verification process, initial identity check with Aegis, and there are various points that need to be given, and those are checked against government resources. Am I saying that correct, John? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Government resources.
Or authoritative sources.
Thank you.
Thank
Authoritative sources. And those checks then give you a pass or fail. Now, somebody could look at that and say, actually, I can get those data points and I can pretend to be or impersonate that brand. So that being said, one of the key things that Aegis and TCR are doing is to close that particular loophole. And by doing a identity plus, and a better identity check involving 2FA or some sort of validation, that is confirming the brand is the brand. The person submitting the data works for either the CSP that represents the brand or is a representative of the brand and gives authority for that is the correct data and that is to be used by the CSP entering the data into the registry. So closing off those loopholes means that we're able to identify that the brand is the brand, which, and that's one of the biggest issues today in any registration process, is you can't trust anybody.
And it's really most relevant for the largest brands in the world or government entities that want to do messaging, because those are the ones that people are going to try and spoof.
Right.
So to verify that you truly are Barclays Bank or you truly are Capital One becomes critically important. But those are also brands where you can discover their registration as a business entity information if you search hard enough. And so to verify that the data is correct that's being submitted it's a first line of defense, but to actually engage in an automated, low-friction way that brand is who they say they are through automated means is the next step that needs to happen.
And are there challenges that you're seeing there in?
Not really, because I think perhaps the first step is to make sure that people realize we're talking about a fully automated process that will not result in a tremendous amount of more friction, but at the same time, as a major global brand, to take that extra minor step to basically say, look, this is the only number that's registered for that brand. So if we see other things, we should be able to quickly realize that we should look at that. Could still be that brand actually sending it, but it's an unregistered message, right? But at least we know to highlight anything that's not registered that's going under that brand.
Now you can have circumstances where the brand who has been validated, verified, may have somebody working inside the organization that doesn't quite know all the rules and regulations for sending compliant messaging. And so they think it's a great idea to send out a particular kind of message, which it would not be fully compliant. And so you can get very valid brands sending very bad messaging. And we've all kind of seen that. And that's an education process. We recognize it's not a bad actor, it's not impersonation, it is just bad compliance practices that they need to be educated on and start to understand what you can and cannot do with communicating with a consumer.
And likely less harm to a consumer if it's just bending the rules, if you will.
Right.
So let's tie that back to onboarding then. So brand came in, they send off, let's say, notifications for delivery, and they went into Black Friday notifications. Is that something that's like, oh, you should have said that during onboarding?
So that's where the feedback loop into someone like Proofpoint and Adaptive, that's where those kind of scenarios work, because when TCR, as any registration process, is capturing a thing that happens in a time and place, a date, time and place, right? So at a certain date, somebody's saying, this is who I am, and it's been verified, this is what I'm going to do on the network. And that's been validated and verified by a DCA. And then they start sending traffic. And then that's where Proofpoint will then look at it and go, this is great, here's the traffic, we know the numbers associated with the traffic, we can tie that back, this is registered traffic, this is good so far. Now, what are they planning to send? Well, they say they're sending 2FA. Why are there marketing messages? Now, it could be they just haven't updated their campaign. Or it could be there's something more nefarious happening. It's a flag for the carrier or for the DCA, whoever's in the line, to review and go, okay, we'll give them a bit of a pass on this and just call them and go, update your campaign. Or actually, this is something, the actual body of the message that was a marketing message is actually bad. And so then there's action to be taken.
Stefan has touched on something that's, I think, very interesting and provides opportunities for improving onboarding. We have at least 4 steps in the process of sending, in the message control process. We have the onboarding. It's an opportunity to keep some of the bad guys off, as well as educate people as to this thing that I love to say, which is carrier requirements or compliance.
Yep.
Then we have policing the in-flight messages, which a number of parties do. We have some reactive after the fact, shutting down phone numbers, campaigns, domains, servers, whatever. And then we have some going after the bad guys by legal means, regulators or whatever. So I just identified 4 basic processes there. And Stefan's talking about feedback loops between the processes. And I think we have a lot of opportunity there. You can be excellent in your own domain. And Proofpoint, I know, for decades now has been taking feedback and user feedback and using that to control the blocking process. And I think some of these feedback loops between these layers are ripe for exploitation, and we're getting started on that.
One of the things I would add to that, if I may, is that the feedback, so we're getting complaint information from consumers. We're able to tie those to a phone number. We're able to tie that to a campaign, tie that to a brand. Well, within the Aegis registration platform for the brand, we have a lot of data fields on that brand, so that company, that entity. And so what we do, and we get notified that someone's being shut down, is we take all that data on that entity and move it into what we call basically the bad actor database. Because every brand that registers, we're running comparison against all of those companies to say, do we have a hit on any data field related to that company? And if we get a hit, then we have a possible flag to say, this is someone trying to come back on that's been shut down. And we can do the deep dive investigation. The other thing is because we have all this information to dive on, we've had instances where they're running a campaign and using a URL for a link. We've been able to figure out who the brand is. We've been able to deep dive and figure out that brand actually owns 15,000 URLs. There were 282 companies. And we can take all that data and not only give it to our customers, but we can also give it to the filter companies. So when they start rotating, they know what's coming next, right? So these are the types of communications that we're working on getting to scale.
Yeah. Well, I don't have to say anything. You guys are saying it all.
Well, say something.
Yeah, +1.
Tell a joke. Tell a joke.
No jokes.
So let me switch gears then. Maybe that will be your entry point back into the conversation. Let's use the R word, the regulatory framework. We're talking about 2 separate regulatory frameworks. I know, Alex, you've done a lot of work with both in the US and Canada in educating the regulator. Not to say that you are the proxy for the regulator in the room, but where do you think we as an industry could be doing better in terms of educating the regulator on data better data when onboarding brands?
First, let me say that I view regulators as potential contributors to the ecosystem. They can do some things very well that we can't do. One of those is going after the bad guys with handcuffs and fines. Eventually, regulators and law enforcement, and that happens. And I think that is probably where they can do the most good. I've spent a lot of time looking at proposed regulations in the U.S. from the FCC, and quite frankly, several of them have the potential to do more harm than good. Things like do not originate list. The do not originate list appears to have its roots in voice, where there is spoofing. The intent is to prevent the bad guys from spoofing a good guy's phone number, where we in I believe all of North America, and certainly Canada and the U.S. have fairly effective anti-spoofing systems and policies in place. Yet we have a do not originate list. So everybody that signs up for a phone number is going to have an opportunity to put their phone number on a voice do not originate list and a text do not originate list. If you have 25,000 customers and you ask them which do not originate lists to put their numbers on, what are you going to have?
A mess. And to Alex's point, that question right there goes back to, I mean, we've heard several panels up here talk about educating the customer, educating the customer, educating the customer. And the constant, Twilio has said that they've gone through that process several times and they have to reiterate to the customer. To Alex's point, if you ask the customer, well, okay, what do you want on, it literally turns into a mess. From a do not originate perspective, some of the analysis that has been done within the network shows that from a do not originate, it's very, very minimal in terms of effectiveness. When it comes to a lot of the other regulations, you must do this. I know on my panel earlier, I said that as soon as you find a way to stop them, 30 seconds later, they found a way around it. And it's a constant battle. So for regulatory to get involved and say, you must do this, that's going to work for about 30 seconds, and then it gets circumvented. So to Alex's point, from a regulation perspective, regulatory has the benefit of far reach into taking information that we as an ecosystem can share with them, and then actually go take down the bad actors. And I think that's probably one of the best approaches, is being able for all of us within the ecosystem to actually share the data to arm the regulators with going after those folks.
The regulators, two of the regulations we've had passed recently, as well as one that's proposed now, do not originate. The one that's proposed now is a URL blacklist. The government or the government regulators giving us a list of URLs to block. That's just, it's too little too late. It's spending $50,000 or so shutting down a resource that a spammer can create for pennies in seconds. That's not the way to win. These things hurt us. They hurt the ecosystem. We need to do a better job of educating the regulators. It's not just the carriers. It's not just the spam filter providers. I think this whole community has to help ensure that the regulators understand how the ecosystem works and where they can help and where regulations might be of little or even negative impact. So I encourage people to watch the dialogue with the regulators and help view them as partners and educate them for the benefit of the ecosystem.
That's a great point, because we do have to educate the right regulator. And every regulator that I've spoken to, off the record, of course, talks about the fact that they want to hear from us. They want us to come in and do the filings that they read, and all of them are read, and sometimes they'll cite you, and that'll be fine, and that'll be great. Stefan, before we open up questions for the audience, would you like to summarize where you see in terms of opportunity for onboarding, and just not only because of what you do for you, but your own vision for?
It's a much tighter process in the validation of the brand and the verification and validation of the brand. It is a closer working relationship with companies such as Proofpoint, Adaptive, so on. The feedback loops between the organizations with Aegis and WMC Global and all of these organizations that are creating the scoring to validate and reference those brands. Because it's only by sharing this data that we can actually have a complete learned experience out of the ecosystem. With that learned experience, it means that there's less holes. With less holes, there's less opportunities for bad actors to take advantage of it.
Great. On that point, I'd like to open up for questions.
Or I tell another joke.
Oh,
Quick, ask a question.
please.
I got a question. I'm asking this question to be very formal I'm taking my employer hat off for a moment. I'm just asking this as a curious question. One quick thing. When you're talking about regulators, are you talking about Canadian regulators or US regulators? Can you clarify that point? We're in Canada right now. I just want to make sure I understood. We're talking about...
There's been in the I'll say that in the U.S. there's been certainly a regulatory emphasis on text messaging lately, and there have been regulations, and what's come out of it is what I'm reflecting on.
Okay.
I believe there are things pending. Certainly the Canadian regulators and the U.S. regulators talk and watch what each other. Yeah, there's an international. I mean, when we were in Dublin at MOG, there were international regulators, and they were, of course, trading notes. And I suspect that this might also apply to Canada.
Got it. Okay.
And from my point of view, the regulators that I was referencing, I work with regulators in the UK, in several different countries in EMEA, Australia, Japan. So from a regulator, my reference to a regulator is more broader.
Great. I just wanted to understand
Sure.
that. Here's my actual question. Okay. Everyone in this room that's worked in messaging, I think, we've got like centuries upon centuries of messaging experience in this room right now. And I think, in the US, as the US market moves to a common foundation of compliance rules, guidelines, expectations with several discrete processes for each of the messaging channels that are in market, it does seem like because you can run anything on any channel, there's a missed opportunity potentially to use channels, whether it's shortcode, toll-free, or 10DLC, as a way of creating some boundaries to contain the risk. And so I'm curious, and this is Allison asking this question, I'm curious, I would love to hear from the people on the stage, what, if any, thoughts you have on now that we're reaching a point where messaging we've reached this maturation point where today anyone can run anything on any channel. Does it make sense in battling bad actors to actually say, if you're running this type of traffic, it needs to be on this channel. And if you're running this type of traffic, it needs to be on this channel. So if you find political traffic running on toll-free, you know that it's not supposed to be there, and you don't have to, it's an immediate action that can be taken. Because as we open things up, it's really beneficial to all of us. It's great for consumers. It's great for brands. But the risk associated with it just keeps growing exponentially because there are more and more ways for bad actors to send traffic. So that was my question.
I think this is a great question, Alice. I think part of the problem is that when you look at the different, I was having a conversation earlier today with somebody about this. When you're looking at how do you create great compliance and ensure that the channels being used to reach the consumers are as clean as possible so consumers can trust those channels. What do you do when you're also battling with in part of that same organization where that conversation is happening, there's another conversation happening, which is, but we need to exceed revenue by another 20% this year. It's a factual thing that happens. There's a battle between, can we reach our revenue targets by being more compliant, or do we decrease our revenue forecasts if we're more compliant, because we're shutting more things down and being therefore aggressively restrictive for the benefit of the consumers, and therefore you restrict the market to grow the market. You clamp down really hard first of all so that people understand where they can go, and then it grows because people understand where they can go. But I think every organization I've ever spoken to have different views on it, and depending who you speak to, whether you speak to the VP of sales versus VP of ops or VP of sort of compliance or regulatory, they will have very differing opinions. And I'm not sure how that internal fight resolves itself easily. While I think that when you're saying, can we, I mean, there is, in the US, there is a little bit of, you've got restrictive channel because in some carriers, there's processes where you can't allow, free messaging or on certain formats. And so you couldn't say put it on 10 DLC. So there's certain types of messaging that only can go on shortcode. And so it's kind of there to a small extent, but we've never expanded on it fully. And I think it's definitely a worthwhile and viable conversation to have. And I just don't know whether people will just be beaten down with a stick by the salespeople.
But interestingly, because you're saying a different onboarding process for different types of campaigns would go on different channels. And from a subcategory perspective within 10DLC, for example, if you want to do political messaging, it's a very different onboarding process in terms of the verification process that we do. And so it's interesting because it sounds like the market's recognized it within a channel, but how do we recognize it on a global basis? So you've made a great question there, and I think we take that back.
I think just to consider as well is, regardless of the market, as there looks to be different types of government regulation coming in, how can we, as an ecosystem, respond to that by saying, well, what we've actually done is controlled things granularly by content, by channel type, right? Yeah. And so if that is a way of also safeguarding certain types of engagement so that the self-regulation that has been so beneficial for I think most of our businesses in the past can continue in some way, shape, or form, right? Clearly, I agree with you, Alex, that we need to partner with the regulators, but I think there is also something to the autonomy that we've been able to so dynamically respond to the market, right? Mm-hmm. Like you need both, right? Yeah.
That's a great point. On that final word, we're running short on time, so thank you again, panel. Thank you for the great question, Allison, and we'll.